As always, I'm smashing, dashing, sliding on through with a little bit of energy. What's good with the YouTube? It's your homie, Big Flacco from Convicts Perspective, smashing, dashing, sliding on through with a little bit of energy, and my co-host, Big Senor Rojo. We have a special guest on today, man. Author, former retired correction officer, um, been one of those ones who's been campaigning to be proactive in the community for years, man. Someone that I respect as far as everything that he's done, as far as in this life. Gabe Morales, how you doing, Gabe?
All right, thank you guys, man. Thank you for having me on the show.
So today, what we discussed, man, we already know that you know you've written books, the history of Nuestra Familia, the history of Mexican Mafia, the history of Aryan Brotherhood, the history of Black guerrilla family, hip hop culture, and all that. But you have a new book we're going to discuss right now, which talks about Black and brown violence. Can you go into a little bit of spill about this book?
Yeah, the book came out at the end of last year, and as you said, I've written a lot of gang books, street gangs, prison gangs, gang violence. And a lot of people have brought up that sometimes we glamorize, my channel and other channels and other authors glamorize the gang lifestyle. And that is certainly something that I know, and I know you guys on your channel don't want to do. A lot of times we start off with a war story, and sometimes it's pretty brutal, but we always try to end with a message. I do, and I know you guys do, with a positive message. I love Rojo's message at the end, stay the F out of prison, and that's, something that youngsters, I hope, hear. And I think it's probably some relevant criticism. We need to make sure that we are sending out the right message, because a lot of these youngsters, it's hard to, both of you guys are, older now in age, wiser, hopefully, when we get up in age. I'm a little bit older than you guys, so I'm still learning, but it's hard to, realize a lot of times, or put ourselves in the shoes of a youngster, of a teenager. They don't hear a lot of that positive stuff. They right now are getting punked a lot of times, their lunch money taken, in middle school, and they don't see the gangs as a bad thing. For them, it's a good thing. Hey, now nobody's messing with me and everything. So I wanted to make sure that I let these youngsters know about their history. I think it's very important for people to know their history, but also to know that a lot of these groups will warp history and cultural identity to fit their own aims. And so I start off with a lot of, it's about Black and brown people. I think we have a lot of common struggles. I know there's a lot of violence between those groups and within those groups. And so I wanted youngsters, and maybe people are not aware of the true history, the brutal history that has happened to Black and brown people over the centuries. And not to use that as an excuse, but it is trauma, and it's generational trauma, and it creates a lot of times generational violence. And so I open up with slavery, very brutal. Talk about that, how millions of Africans were brought over against their will and enslaved, and a lot of them died on the way. I mean, millions on the way, and a lot of them died when they got here. So we just had Martin Luther King Day, I know, a few days ago, and that's something that I think we need to remember Martin Luther King's messages every day, and remember the struggles of Black and brown people every day. So I also talk, about the Aztecs and Mayas, and I'll be honest, when I was younger, I painted a lot of murals, like Aztec and Mayan murals. And then one time I had a college professor come in and look up at it, and she admired it. And then she said, how do you know you're Aztec? How do you know you're Mayan? And I was like, aren't we? Because, that's what, was being put out. You're Mexican, you're Aztec, you're Mayan, and she goes, not me, I'm Yaqui. A lot of people don't know about our people. We were very, very quiet. mysterious. The only tribe that was not conquered by the Spaniards, because we didn't leave a trace where we were. We moved around and nomadic. I mean, not even live an ember at a fire. We picked that up and they never could figure out where we're at. So I was like, wow, okay, well, this lady's Yaqui. And then I come to find out from talking to my dad and my grandma, I'm Yaqui. Now I was born in Yakima, but I tell people, yeah, hey, I'm Yaqui. They're like, oh yeah, I'm from Yakima, Washington. But it's true. Not every person down in Mexico, unless you're from Mexico City, maybe you're Aztec. If you're from southern Mexico, maybe you're Mayan. But I think a lot of these kids are getting it wrong. They are not Aztec or Mayan. They're probably other tribes that were enslaved by the Aztecs. So not only talk about, slavery of the Africans by their own people and, sold by their own people and the brutal struggles of them, but our own people. A lot of times we don't know that. So I described that, the history of Mexico, in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, other Latinos too are included in that. But for people to know their history, like I said, and get it right, and don't get confused a lot of times. Do a DNA test. If you have any doubt, there's a lot of Black people who, really proud of the African-American roots, but a lot of them have a lot of Anglo blood, a lot of white blood. It's the sad truth. A lot of slave owners raped the African women. And so a lot of Blacks, especially light-skinned Blacks, have a lot of white blood in them, and DNA proves that, So I talk about that. I think it's very important to, again, to know your history, know your culture. And then I talk about the takeover of the American Southwest and the Civil War. So of course, the Civil War involved a lot of Blacks fighting for freedom against slavery. And the Mexican-American War was Chicanos living in Mexico. All of a sudden now they're Americans. And that struggle, that transformation, and that I think is still going on today. A lot of people still struggling with the trauma from both the Civil War and the Mexican-American War. We're really only a few generations away from that. It seems like it's ancient history probably to a lot of people, but it's really not. And we're still being impacted today by those two big events. So moving on then, I talk about the civil rights era. Like I said, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, I was a part of that. And
You were a Brown Beret, right? One time, right?
well, I was too young for the Brown Berets. I wanted to join them, but they wouldn't take me. They said, you're too young, maybe you can start the Baby Brown Berets chapter or something. But I grew up around Black Panthers and Brown Berets. A lot of people don't know that, but after Oakland in Los Angeles, Seattle was the third chapter of the Black Panther Party. And we had two chapters of the Brown Berets, one in Seattle, one in Yakima. A lot of people don't know nothing about that either. They think, hey, it's just, a Cali thing, or, maybe other parts of the Southwest. So
I think a lot of people, when they think about Seattle, don't necessarily think about a lot of minorities either, though, man. I don't know. That's just how Seattle has always came off to me. Until I went there, I thought, oh, old, white, liberal, yuppie, uppity kind of area,
Right. Starbucks,
Yeah, right.
Get a little shout out to Starbucks. Yeah, they're on every corner up here. I mean, yeah, you're right, Rojo. There is a lot of middle class. It's where Microsoft and Amazon is. A lot of middle class white folks up here. For a lot of people, maybe from more ethnic parts of the country, it could be a culture shock for them. But I tell you, our family's been in Washington State for 100 years. And a lot of people are shocked by that. They're like, what? You got Mexicans up there in Washington? I said, who do you think picks all the freaking apples? You know what I mean? We were up here. We were one of the first Chicano families up here. And there's, this area was founded by Native Americans, strong Native culture here. And there was Blacks that came up here, especially after World War II. Asians, it's a very, very big Asian and Pacific Islander area. So a lot of people settled there from, all those ethnic groups. And at first it was mostly Mexicans. In fact, we were one of the few families, probably about 10 dozen families first came up here, and then more and more came in. And now, man, I tell you, it used to be back in the day, hard to even find a good Mexican restaurant. Now there are taco trucks on every corner. It's a trip. So yeah. Talk about the, those struggles during the 50s and 60s, civil rights. And then I talk a little bit about my upcoming around Brown Berets and Black Panthers and other groups. I was considered a radical. So I was part of the takeover of an institution called El Centro de la Raza in Seattle. You can look it up. Takeover was in 1972. I joined in 1973. So October 1972 is when a bunch of Chicanos took it over because there was no services for Raza up here, and they stayed, and they're still there. And so I joined in 1973, and I was a part of them for about 10 years. I was considered a youth leader, and yeah, so I talk about all that stuff, and then gang violence. In my book, The Life and Times of About the Local, I talk about a very traumatic event that impacted my whole life, the rest of my life, and probably one of the biggest influences of why I do what I do. And my 21st birthday party was crashed by a bunch of cholos, Mexican mafia members and associates. A lot of people say, no, that never happened. It happened, and I document it, and I back it up with some hard evidence. And it did happen. My brother's best friend got his leg shot. They tried to hack him up with a meat cleaver. It was brutal. It was crazy. You can read more about it in my book, Life and Times of About the Local. But they kept on coming after me. They couldn't get my brother. My brother was a gang member. I was not a gang member. I was, I guess, what they call associate today. I knew a lot of them. My brother was one. He was a pimp.
You were a Norteño associate. Am I not
mistaken?
Well,
yeah. They'll kind of explain how that happened. So where I'm from in Yakima, it was Norteños mostly at that time. It's changed now. There's a lot of Sureños, but at that time, Yakima, and it still is like a headquarters for Norteños. Way back then, there was West and Norteños. And again, I document this in my book, in my books, Gangster's Paradise, Gangs in the Pacific Northwest. I show pictures and documents, and people can look it up, news articles, all that kind of stuff. So anyways, it's not as big as Cali, but yeah, they were there. And it got worse in the late 1970s, early 80s. And like I said, at my birthday party, 1981, that's when it all came to a head. And it was kind of like be killed or kill, kill or be killed. And because these guys were Mexican Mafia and Sureños that were coming after me, the Norteños actually said, hey, don't let them do that. Don't let them punk you like that. Join us. We'll handle it. And I was like, nah. And my brother's gang was like, they were a mixed race gang in Seattle. They were like, hey, let's deal with it. Let's retaliate. And I was, so I was perplexed. I ended up joining the Marine Corps. I tell people, hey, I joined a bigger gang. Look at me now. And that was probably, one of the best moves I ever made. Now, a lot of people criticized me at the time, saying I was being a coward, running away from my problems, but it really changed my life. The Marine Corps gave me some discipline that I did not have before my life. My life was crazy, and I was running wild on the streets. And so it settled me down, got me more focused and definitely more disciplined. And, once a Marine, always a Marine. Like I said,
there's nothing cowardly at all about joining the service, man. Knowing you can go to war at any time. You could join and a week later, you could get shipped off to a hot zone. There ain't nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
That's crazy, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, but and I'm sure you guys have been called names by people too. And peer pressure is a mother, like I said, especially when you're a young teen. That's, I think, why a lot of kids do what they do. A lot of stupid stuff they do is their brains aren't developed. That's the other thing. Our brains aren't even developed as men until we're about 30 years old.
Even longer for some others of us. I didn't feel like I was a full adult man, bro, until I was probably 37, 38, to be quite honest,
Yeah, well, hey, some of us, mature later, some of us a little earlier, but yeah,
I always
that's
get
it.
amazed when I see kids like 18 years old go straight to college and just start handling business right away. I'm like, dude, when I was 18, I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
I was
good,
like
good for them.
12. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
hey, there's something to be said for that square life. I mean, for you youngsters listening maybe to this, you may be getting a hard time sometimes for being a square and and carrying your books and going to school, not being a fool. But believe me, I've had so many people too that later on told me, "Hey, Gabe, you were right." They actually, a lot of the ones that make fun of me and ridiculed me later on said, "You were right. You did the right thing. I wish I did. I wish I had joined the military. I wish I had gone to college." And
Those of us with sound mind, man, we realize that stuff too. Unless something's really, I don't know what the limitation might be on the thinking capacity or whatnot, man. But when you get to a certain age, most people who's been in this lifestyle that I know that I talk to are like, man, I wish I would have went to the military. Man, I wish I would have went to that vocational.
yeah,
It just takes maturity, man, and life
yeah.
experience.
Well, I kind of was forced to do it. When I went into the recruiting station, I was probably the easiest recruit that Marine Corps recruiter ever had, because I was just trying to get the hell out of Dodge. You know what I'm saying? Because these guys were shooting at me. They were trying to kill me. They were trying to finish the job, and so anyway, so then after the Marine Corps, I was in the MOS. It was very restricted. I worked in the Tactical Air Command Center, and very few of us in the Marine Corps were in that job. You basically had to work, wait until a first sergeant died to promote. I mean, it was pretty tight. And so I just did 4 in the Corps. And then when I got out, I didn't know, what I was going to do now. I was like, man, I don't really want to go back to Seattle because, those guys probably still looking for me, you know. So my mother-in-law actually was working at Chino Prison at the time, and as a corrections officer. And she said, hey, well, why don't you put in for the California Department of Corrections? I was like, what? No ways, man. I see too many movies. I don't want to go in there. But she's barely 5 foot tall, 150 pounds. And she's like, what's the matter? Matters, the big Marine scared? I was like, yes. But I put in for it anyways, and I got hired on, started working at Folsom Prison. So I'll be honest, I was scared when I first went through there. The East Gate, it looks like a bad place when you go in there. You can smell the fear and smell the blood, and there's ammonia they use to cover up where the blood was. And Old Folsom is like a working museum. I know you guys are familiar with Alcatraz. I don't know if you ever did that tour there, but it's the same thing. I mean, you go 10 feet, like this is where the riot of 1920 happened. They took the warden hostage and 5 people were killed, including the warden. And you go 10 more feet, this is where, Charles Manson was housed. And you go 10 more feet, this is where, they broke out the Gatling gun, and 2 inmates were killed and 10 wounded. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. And so I spent most of my time at New Folsom Prison working there. And when we opened it up in 1987, my very first escort was Blue Norris of the Aryan Brotherhood and his bodyguard, Ox Rufel. So any of the people watching this know anything about Aryan Brotherhood know who those cats were. And I dealt with a lot of heavy guys. Joe Morgan, I escorted him into the violence control unit. You name it, any of the heavy hitters, I probably dealt with them or at least heard of them. So yeah, I did that. And it was rough. I ain't gonna lie. There were some days where, I had to check my drawers. Some of those riots, I know you two, can verify that when it could be really, really boring in prison. I say it's, 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. And I know you guys can relate to that. It could be really, really quiet, and then all hell breaks loose, and people are getting stabbed, gunners are shooting. And now those bullets don't distinguish, between officer and convict. My yard sergeant was shot at Soledad by his own gunner, not on purpose, by accident and by ricochet. And so we had
live?
signs in Folsom, no warning shots for that reason. But
Did he survive?
he did survive. But yeah, he had the wound and stuff. He wore it kind of like a badge of honor, but he was like, yeah. We're in this skirmish, fight, tooth and nail with the convicts, and I got shot.
New Folsom in the 80s, right? Those were CR wasn't that a Northern Structure Yard, or was it a Bulldog Yard at that time?
Well, it's kind of interesting because Folsom Prison was a Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brotherhood controlled prison. But when we moved those ABs and Mexican Mafia over, we first moved them to C facility, which was the segregation unit eventually, at first. So the guys moved out of 4A, which was the segregation, the hole for Folsom. We moved them to C facility first, and then over to B facility. And so when we moved those guys over to B facility, they moved in a lot of Norteños and NF. Dealt a lot with those guys too. Luis Roche, Leonel Red Canos, and a lot of these individuals were heavy hitters with the NF, as well as a lot of Northern Structure. The Northern Structure was around, but they really didn't start blowing up until the late 80s to early 90s. It was kind of on the down low at first. They're very selective, and then they started recruiting like crazy and just got more and more crazy, as you both know, until they kind of got out of control.
So you mentioned Roach from Frisco was there?
Yes, he was. Yeah, I actually wrote the report when he took over the yard with the Norteños, and he'd always have two bodyguards by him, and he'd be surveying the yard like he was a supervisor. So they had different squads going around the track, how they walk around and everything. And definitely I could see groups of Norteños. At that time, a lot of them still had like the tube socks with the red stripes and the blue socks, for the Sureños, the blue stripes. And so they weren't supposed to have that. They were trying to take back the yards from the prison gangs, San Quentin, Folsom, other places, but a lot of stuff still got through on property, and they would flag those around. And when I could, I would say, hey, can't be wearing that on the yard. Got to put it on your property, whatever. If they didn't listen, blue t-shirts, red t-shirts, that kind of thing, then I confiscate them. But I usually gave them a warning first. But it was a good thing and bad thing. We knew who was who, in the zoo, like I used to say. But it also was instigating gang violence a lot of times. So when Roach was out there in the yard, I saw the Norteños grouping up and everything, and the Sureños at that time also clicking up. I actually had a guy named Pingo del Delgadillo, who's a rapper, who was on my kitchen crew. And he didn't report to work one day. And I looked out the kitchen window of the dining room. They have the little, probably 1 foot by 1 foot glass windows you could look out onto the yard. And I could see him out there on the track, run with the homeboys. And so I paged him on the intercom and told him to report for work. And I heard that. And next thing I know, he goes to the weight pile. Him and an NF member go to the weight pile. Some black inmates slip them something. I'm telling the gunner, put the yard down, but they're not really paying attention like I am, and don't really know the players like I am, their locations and who is who. And end up being that bunch of Sureños got stabbed in what they call Blood Alley, between the big yard and little yard, as they're going back, a yard recall. These two, this Norteño and NF member, started stabbing a bunch of Sureños. So at that point, then they took over the yard. So I wrote that main report that happened, and Luis Roche basically supervised all that. The Norteños and NF took over that yard, and then it's kind of interesting because the Bulldogs have been forming too. There's a lot of debate, but mid 80s is when the Bulldogs started protesting the NF. Even before that, I would say even back to the late 70s, crackers and all that. They finally then, by the mid 80s, though, said, that's enough. We're definitely not going to follow the NF pushing us around and all that kind of thing. And so they started moving a lot of bulldogs, especially from San Quentin, where the council was, the Bulldog Council was. They started moving a lot of those guys in, and I'm talking about the leaders. And so I documented them, you know, right away. I could say, you know, they would always bark. You know, that was a big thing they would do. The Bulldogs would bark, especially when they went back at yard recall, and they would group up and they'd bark. And, you know, again, it was like flagging, and it was instigating. So it was a good thing kind of that they were doing that. I knew who was who, but also a bad thing because it created a lot of friction with the Norteños. And basically they're saying, hey, you know, we ain't kicking with you or the NF and FU. And they did it via hits, a few hits at first. And then pretty soon there was a big gangbang. And I wrote that report too. A big gangbang. And I'm talking about like 20 versus 20, maybe more on each side, Bulldogs and Northern Structure. And I remember there was two guys fighting. No, there was one Northern Structure and two Bulldogs who had attacked him and shanked him. And the gunner had said, you know, hey, it's those three right there. Separate that guy from those two. And that's what the yard officers did. And I was working in the yard at that point. I was on the yard physically right by where it happened. And the yard sergeant, who's not a regular, he said, okay, resume yard after he got those three off. I was like, no. There's still a lot of guys left. They're all prone down all over the place. I said, gather all these guys left. All these guys were involved. And sure enough, inspect them, and they all had stab wounds, marks, bruises, you know, marks on their hands. So I think I was pretty good as a, no matter whether I worked as a dining hall officer, yard officer, a gunner, you know, I paid attention. A lot of these officers, they just there to, you know, do their 8 and hit the gate. But I was never one of those. I was always one where, hey, you know, these guys were walking around the yard. I'd say, hey, I'd hit them up. You know, hey, who are you? Let me see your ID card. You know, look at their names. Let me see your ink. You know, have them take off their shirts and stuff.
Right
and
there on the yard.
Yeah. I was probably, you know, I'd be one of you guys.
They probably didn't like you too much.
I was just gonna say I would have been one of you guys' worst nightmares. Cell searches, you know, a lot of them would just hang out in the office, and no, I was out there doing cell searches, you know, looking at pictures, documents, you know. I was paying attention to all that.
Asshole.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got called that more than a few times. And then for a year or two, I was assigned to central control, which is kind of like the brains of the, you know, the prison. Yeah. So all the counts go in. You basically take control of the units run their own. Each unit runs their own unit. Each yard runs their own yard. But you basically oversee control of the whole facility. So A facility, B facility, and C facility, and there's 8 units in each of those facilities. They all had to call in after they did their counts. And so we had a Rolodex of every single inmate that was supposed to be in those buildings. And so if the count came up short, I'd be like, nope, better check again. And I'm sure they called me asshole too. But I was like, no, we ain't letting this go.
You know, they didn't escape. They can't get out of here.
Exactly. You got to make sure, you know, they didn't escape. And most of the time, in fact, we didn't have any escapes there. Folsom was notorious for not having escapes, but both Old Folsom and New Folsom. I think there was at Old Folsom 2 escapes in 50 years. And I don't recall when I was there at New Folsom, anybody escaping.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's got out of New Folsom to this day.
Yeah, no, you know, they might have hit that first fence, but bam, you know, they get shot. But they wasn't playing about no warning shots. So anyways, going back to my central control story, it was pretty boring in between counts, which was, you know, regular type of occurrence. But in between those counts, it was pretty boring, to be honest. And so I'd listen to the radio traffic, but it was graveyard shift. There wasn't really a lot happening. So I would pull C files, and every night I would read 4 or 5 C files of heavy hitters. And so I learned a lot that way too.
I've always wondered how you can, because I know being a CO, you come across a lot of things, but yeah, I've always wondered, because you're like the fountain of
you get that confidential, you can read that confidential stuff too as
well.
Oh, you had access to the confidential stuff as well?
Yeah, and some of that stuff, you know, was thick. I mean, like Joe Morgan's file, thick.
Yeah, I bet.
Because all kinds of people telling on him. Trying to get some extra points, you know what I'm saying? And so, anyways, you know, I learned a lot that way too. And, you know, I'm kind of like a encyclopedia, you know, I'm always like to learn. And so I soak it up like a sponge, you know, all that information and everything. And, you know, there's some officers even today that are critical about my shows, maybe even critical about this show. Hey, you know, you're giving up all the top secrets. Ain't none of it secret, you know. It's standard operational procedure. Anybody can pull it up. You know, they can look at it. It's public disclosed information. Now, the CFOL stuff is not. But even then, a lot of it is brought up in discovery during all these RICO trials. You know, so a lot of it's there. I have never divulged anything that hasn't been put out, you know, in the press. You know, I'm not revealing no secrets, but I do have a lot of knowledge, and sometimes knowledge about things where I was there, and I'm hearing the stories being told, you know, about like the Bulldogs and stuff. And
You're like, no,
it didn't happen like that. I was there when that incident happened. I cuffed that dude up. You know what I'm saying? I wrote that report. So, you know, I couldn't be everywhere at once, but like I said, reading other officers' reports, I would do that. Inmate C files, you know, yeah, I did that for 6 years. To be honest, I got pretty burned out. I got, I guess what you could call combat fatigue. And plus, you know, I was originally from Seattle. It had been 10 years then at that point since they shot at me. And I thought, you know, hey, maybe the coast is clear. I still looking over my shoulder though, you know, but a little calm down a little bit, you know, maybe they got a, you know, somebody on their hit list a little bit higher than me now. You know, I'm a little bit lower.
Hey, working in the gun towers, did you ever have to shoot?
I did. I shot one time. I tell you, Ron, a lot. They would test the gunners. And again, this ain't no secret. Anybody who's been to prison knows this. They would play grab ass a lot of times. Gangs would, and see if the gunner was paying attention. And if you rack around and everything, then they would stop. But if you played grab ass and the gunners, you know, going to sleep, smoking a cigarette, kicking back, not paying attention, they're like, yeah, that's where we're going. That's where this head is going down in front of this guy. Yeah. And so I would put them on notice right away. Hey, come here, homeboy. You know, let me talk to you. And I said, hey, don't do that because I will shoot you. I'm just telling you right now. I don't want to shoot you, but I will if you do anything crazy. And they're like, oh, hey, Morales, you know, hey, you know, you ain't got to do all that, you know.
we were just funning.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, okay, well, don't do it around me. And I would give them a warning. You know, I didn't write up a lot of people if I had to, you know, I did, but usually I would give a verbal warning. I think that's, you know, fair in most cases, you know, unless it was a hit that went down a real assault. And so,
hey,
yeah, I did.
Hold on for 1 second. Hold on for 1 second, Gabe.
So, as I was saying, in that shooting incident, I was working the gun. Now, this was not an individual who was up close to me, like usually happened when they're testing me. This guy was way down on the other side of the yard by the commissary. And so there was a guy I noticed, they're getting his commissary, and there was this blood shot caller named Herc, and he was in an out of bounds area by the office. So he's watching the program office, watching the commissary, and he has two soldiers then that are waiting probably 20 feet away from the commissary office for this guy to get his commissary. And so this guy grabs his 2 bags full of groceries and starts heading back to the unit. Now, this is before yard recall, but a lot of times the unit officers let him come back to yard. In fact, they liked it when guys got off the yard. You want to come back early? Fine. They weren't supposed to. It was supposed to wait till yard recall, but it didn't always work like that. You know, sometimes officers will bend the rules, as you know. So this guy has these 2 bags of groceries. He's walking up the hill, and then these 2 soldiers just book, and they reach up with their hands. I could not see because it's probably 100 yards, you know, nearly 100 yards from where I'm at. And I see them coming up, and I'm thinking they're going to shank this guy if they kill him. You know, be responsible possibly for not doing anything. But if I did shoot him, and shoot, don't shoot. And this is all happening in seconds. And so I jacked around and I was like, I'm not 100% sure. So even though it said no shots, I put one in the dirt. All the inmates are getting it down and didn't give the complete warning to staff and convicts. I remember the lieutenant come out, the program officer said, "Who shot that? You know, who fired that shot? You know, how come there's no warning? You know, because they're hearing it too." And I said, "That was me, sir." And the yard sergeant backed me up and said, "Oh, he gave a full warning. He gave a full warning." So that was kind of half truth, but anyways, like I said, you know, I felt responsible. I felt I had to do something, and I put that round into the dirt. And I tell you, that groceries went flying. They never did find the shanks, but I know those shanks went flying up on the roof, and you know, everybody went down, and it was kind of crazy. And then, of course, they pulled me down from the gunner post, and you know, I wasn't allowed to go up there until the shooting review board, which I was cleared as a good shooting. But I tell you, I was a little nervous. I was a little nervous, you know, that it wouldn't go right. You could lose your job over stuff like that. So we did have a union, but you know, hey, sometimes guys lost their job for, you know, a simple mistake. Sometimes they had worked long in their career and they did something that where they didn't collect their retirement. So that was that story. Yeah, I remember that one very clearly, like it was yesterday.
I got a question for you. What are the biggest similarities between the NF and Mexican Mafia, and what are the biggest differences between the two?
That's a good question. I tell you, I used to give gang classes there at C facility, and I remember one officer who actually grew up in Sacramento and grew up around, I won't say the barrio she was from, but grew up around the homeboys, some of them who became Northern Structure and NF members. And I gave a class and I said, you know, hey, you know, there are hundreds of Northern Structure members in the California Department of Corrections. There are probably around 200 NF. So at that point, then I'm talking about like 1,000 Northern Structure, 200 West Familia. So we're talking about 1,000. I said, but there are only about 200 Mexican Mafia members. And there's probably a couple thousand Sureños, we're not sure. But those are street gangs and, you know, Mexican Mafia prison gang, West Familia and Northern Structure, Nuestra Raza, also known as, were prison gangs. And she's like, wait a minute, there's 1,000 of these, only 200 of them. Well, how come, you know, there's only certain yards controlled by the NF and NS, and the Mexican Mafia controls so many yards? And I tell you, I was kind of stumped. I was like, well, that's a good question. And now I think I know the answer. Northern Structure and Nuestra Raza documented all their members. I mean, I find lists all the time in cell searches and bulldogs. Mousy Morales, when we hooked him up, I found a whole roster of all bulldogs who were documented by him and other leaders at that time. Same thing with, you know, Northern Structure and West Familia. We'd find kites, rosters written in small writing. As you know, they do 3 or 4, sometimes even 4 lines of line paper and put them on there. And so we had all this documentation on West Familia and Northern Structure. Very, very organized constitution for the West Familia, no constitution for the Mexican Mafia. You know, the XIV bonds for the Northern Structure, nothing for the Sureños really. Although, you know, they have a few recognized rules now, but they're not real formal. They're more recognized than written down. And so it was easy, I think, to know who was who as far as the NF and NS, as far as their documentation, their own documentation we used against them. Mexican Mafia, much more fluid. So they have, I think, and it's not to say you guys know the NS and NF both have internal conflicts, but I think there's much more in the Mexican Mafia as far as politicking against each other, even though it's supposed to be against the rules, you know, the informal rules. They do it all the time. You hear about all the time guys, even, you know, in recent months being killed by their own. Also, a lot of the old timers are dying off. So, you know, it's a new school generation for Mexican Mafia now in West Familia. And so I would say probably the big difference in regards to your question, Flaco, the big difference is a lot more organization with NF and NS and much more fluid with Mexican Mafia and their, you know, camaradas, their associates, and the Sureños. The Sureños are just like, you know, they'd be out of control. If the Mexican Mafia wasn't taxing them and kind of organizing them, they'd be, and they still are. You know, a lot of people say still shooting at each other. You know, they're supposed to have a truce with each other, but you know, no more drive-bys and all that. But it's still happening. You know, even though the Mexican Mafia tries to assert their control and authority, you know, there's just too many of them. And I guess to answer your question, that's what I see kind of in a nutshell is the big difference, is the difference in organization, both formal and informal.
Who are in general out of all these groups, right? I'm just curious, who do you think was the most influential leader within, whether they're AB, MA, BGF, or, you know what I mean, NF? Who do you think had the most influence, like as far as leadership qualities and skills and, you know, from your research?
Well, for the Mexican Mafia, it was Joe Morgan. I mean, I hear a lot of people talk about, you know, he was no godfather. I beg to differ. He was given the title of honorary godfather by Cheyenne Cadena, who was killed by the Nuestra Familia in 1972, December 1972, December 17th to be exact, 1972, Palm Hall, Chino Prison. Cheyenne was very smart, and he was the one depicted by almost, you know, in American Mia Santana. The real guy's name was Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena. He was from Bakersfield. And Joe Morgan was much older than most of the Emmy members. Joe Morgan had a criminal career going back to the 40s. You know, he was doing time at 15 for the murder of the husband of a lady, you know, a much older lady that he was, you know, doing, and she convinced him to kill her husband, and he was convicted of that crime as a teenager and did time after that. Was very rarely out in the street. But he had power whether he was inside or outside, like no other in the Mexican Mafia. And so people might, you know, they can say whatever they want. You know, it's kind of funny when people are dead, people be talking a lot of smack about him, you know, say, oh, he wasn't all that. No, he was the most respected. You know, he was like E.F. Hutton. When he spoke, everybody listened. And so for the Mexican Mafia, Joe Morgan. For the Nuestra Familia, you know, Chalo Hernandez was really the founder. John Valdez and Juan Valdez, you know, were put in charge, but Chalo was the power really behind the NF, breaking away from the control and oppression of the Mexican Mafia back in the mid-1960s. After him, of course, Babo Sosa was, you know, a big shot caller. There's no doubt, but he was not the founder. And, you know, I explained that in my book. I see a lot of misinformation about Babo being started. No, he was not the founder. He was a very early member, very violent member. And he did control the organization, you know, from the early 70s to the late 70s. But then he got a little power hungry, him and Death Row Joe. And then Black Bob Vasquez, Coach, they call him Coach. It's the name he earned at Folsom Prison 4A. Ran the organization, and I think probably the most influential NF member.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
I mean, a lot of things he put in place are still in place. You know, might not be the mess anymore. It's the overall governing body, but he was very smart, you know, and so you know, him, of course, you know, he had his supporters, you know, Brown Bob, and a lot of other people supported Black Bob. They call it the Black Bob, Brown Bob war against Babo and Death Row Joe. And that was a split in the organization. But really, I think Black Bob saved the NF. It might have folded right there, but he reinvented them again. And then, you know, there's been several people after that, you know, been, you know, pretty powerful, but they've always reinvented themselves, even with all these RICO cases the NF has. As far as the Aryan Brotherhood, they were started by, you know, several individuals, but Jack Red Mahoney was the founder of the AB, at least the co-founder. And then he was killed by Blue Norris, not by his own hand, but by his orders. So basically Blue Norris, then Wendell Blue Norris, took the throne for the Aryan Brotherhood. And I would say he was probably the most powerful AB member. There was Blinky Griffin, you know, and Robert New York Crane, a few other AB shot callers in those early days, but he was the big one. Now on the feds, Barry Mills, the Red Baron, you know, definitely number one in the feds, although he had supporters too, you know, T.D. Bingham, they called him the Hulk. You know, there was a lot of other ABs too that were very powerful too. But that's what I say for the MA, NF, and AB. As far as the Black Guerrilla family, you know, they were founded basically after there was some friction with Black and white inmates and staff. And George Jackson, you know, was considered the founder of that organization. He was a revolutionary. Now, there were other people with him. W.L. Nolan joined him, other individuals, but George Jackson really was the brains behind the Black Guerrilla family and is still revered today. So I don't think there was probably anybody more respected than George. Now, there's been other people like Fatih Carter, was Bunchy Carter, founder of the LA Black Panthers. Fatih Carter ran them for a while too. And there's been other, you know, BGF. But the BGF, I kind of put them in a different category. They were much more political, although they had, you know, the money arm. Doc Holliday, you know, was running the money faction, but they've always been a lot more political, anti-system, anti-cop, Black Power. You know, they're still around, but it's kind of like a totally different category. I don't really even put them in the same category as the NF, the MA or AB.
Hey, I got a question for you, man. We're pretty familiar with about the amount of members from, you know, both of the Latino organizations. How deep were the AB and the BGF back in the days?
You know, I don't think, to be honest, I don't think the AB or the BGF really had more than about 100 members. You know, sometimes a little bit more, but they had a lot of supporters. So like for the BGF, you had the Kumi. Yeah, you guys are familiar with there in the Bay Area. So, you know, Kumi, African organization, I saw that pop up at Folsom when Mousy started Old Folsom, and I had Antoine Green as a yard worker on my yard. He was the number 2 guy. So for the Kumi, so you have a lot of support groups. Same thing with the AB. You know, there might not be that many members, but you had the NOR, the Nazi lowriders, you have the PNI, you have all these groups that support them. You have now like the Fresnex. You have so many groups now. You know, Irish Family. You know, Mob. I mean, there's so many different groups now. It's hard to keep up sometimes, even for somebody like me that does try to do that. So yeah, you know, I hate to say, you know, hey, this group is better or stronger or smarter than the other group, because, you know, I don't want to contribute to the prison politics, but they've all had an influence on our communities, and that's I kind of want to go back to my book if I could before we run out of time.
That's where I was thinking. I wanted to ask you now, in your book, Black and Brown Violence, how much do you see similarities that occur out there in the streets as opposed to prison? Like, it seems like there's always an internal struggle within your own people.
Well, most definitely. And, you know, I was looking at the book chapters again, too. So the 1970s violence, you know, Crips and Bloods in LA, the late 1970s, well, mid 1970s for the Norteños, you know, that movement, and then later 1970s for the Sureños, that whole thing blowing up in California and then going nationwide. Same thing with Crips and Bloods, you know, started in LA, Compton, Long Beach, and then went nationwide. And so, yeah, the prison gangs draw their members from those street gangs. Now, that's another thing I hear a lot of people talking about. You know, the Sureños, I've seen this a lot of times by law enforcement even. You know, the Sureños are foot soldiers for the Mexican mafia. That is not true. very few Sureños ever become Mexican Mafia members, and very few even know any Mexican Mafia members. You know, it's only the most talented, the biggest drug dealers, you know, the best robbers, best criminals that they'll recruit from. And that's the same for all those groups. So, you know, I think you got to be real careful. And I try to check myself too sometimes about throwing these generalities out there, because there's always exceptions. And a lot of times it's just not true. So to be accurate, then 1970s, you know, a lot of gang violence. And I describe in my book, not just LA, but Chicago violence. You know, you have folks and people over there, Latin Kings, you know, Gangster Disciples, all these different gangs. The gangs of New York. Now, I had a hip hop panel on recently. Gangs have been in New York, you know, for 100 years. And then hip hop came along and actually ended a lot of that gang violence. A lot of those original hip hop guys were members of gangs like African Bambaataa, the Zulu Nation, you know. And then that kind of died down in New York. Then in LA, they started gangster rap, and then that bounced back to the East Coast, and now you got gangster rappers over there too. So it all influences each other, you know, the streets, coast to coast, the inside, the outside, you know, it's all relevant. I also bring up the drug war, you know, the crack cocaine, that fueled a lot of the growth and violence of the Crips and Bloods, but also Sureños. You know, a lot of people think, hey, hey, the drug war just involved Crips and Bloods. No, Sureños and Norteños were involved in that too.
Do you think that was a contributing factor to like the racial divide between the black and brown in Southern California that has gone on for so many years that they're trying to repair to this day?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. You know, I mean, I don't really like throwing out names there, but there was a Crip faction and a Sureño faction in South Central LA where, you know, supposedly this big dope deal went down, and, you know, the blacks ripped off the Sureños, and there was dozens of people killed over it. So yeah, definitely it led to some tensions out on the street, you know, competition for drug sales. But mostly, and I say this over and over again in this book, mostly blacks kill blacks, mostly brown kill brown. It's really amazing because they talk a lot of times bad about each other, but they mostly kill each other. You know, there's black pride and brown pride, but they're mostly not showing that. They're mostly, you know, hurting their own people. And so, you know, the drug war did incarcerate a lot of people. So I talk about the prison industrial complex, how that all blew up. And I helped open new jails, new prisons. I was a part of that as an officer. We're now seeing, you know, a trend now towards emptying our, they call it the schools to prison pipeline, you know, trying to stop that at least. I think maybe it's gone too far in some instances, letting out violent offenders. I don't think drug offenders need to be incarcerated unless they're violent. They need rehabilitation. So I talk a lot about that. I talk a lot about criminal justice movements, you know, Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, and how that has affected the system as far as, I think, done some good reforms, but you can't push the police too far, because I tell you, I talk to black and brown people all the time, you know, in the hoods, and they're like, no, we don't want to get rid of the police. You know, it's crazy out here. You know, my son's getting shot and all this kind of stuff. So police brutality is what I don't like. I didn't like it in the California Department of Corrections. I don't like it when I see it on the streets. So, you know, the George Floyd thing and all that changed a lot of things. Is still changing. Some people think it hasn't gone far enough, but I'm worried too that we go too far and tie the hands of law enforcement, and then that will hurt all kinds of people. And I tell you, even at Folsom Prison, even gang members, even convicts like suppression sometimes. They would tell me, hey, Morales, man, get that dude up off the yard. That dude's crazy. You know, he's gonna do something crazy. He's out of control. He's nuts. He, you know, mentally ill. And so we do have a lot of mentally ill in our institutions. It's unfortunate. The mental health institutions, basically the whole system is broken down. A lot of them end up in jail and prison, but we got to do something about that. I talk about the recent upsurge in gang violence that we're seeing again. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, the knuckleheads that want to listen, maybe they need locked up until at least they're mature enough, till their brain develops enough, you know, to no longer be a threat to themselves even, you know, and to society as well as the police. I talk about trauma. a lot. It happened to me. I still suffer from it. I think by talking about it, it helps talk about some of these incidents that happened to me. Shows like this, I think, is good. It brings back a lot of crazy stuff. And I'm sure you guys have been there sometimes too, where you can actually go back to where that happened. When I was 5 years old, I saw a guy get his head blown off. No kid should have to see something like that. And so that's the kind of thing I don't want to see. I want to end the violence, against black and brown people in particular, which is epidemic. I want to see the end of drug abuse, fentanyl. I don't know if you guys are seeing that down there, but in Seattle, they're ODing left and right.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's just nuts. And the drug cartels don't care. You would think, hey, they'd want to look out for their clients, wouldn't want them to OD, but they don't care because there's so many people out there getting hooked on it. They're still making billions.
You know what I've noticed the problem is they send the fentanyl raw over the border just like they would any other type of substance. And the people over here are the ones pressing them and stuff. And man, they're not no scientists, man. They don't know that it only takes one granule of product to go into a pill to have the desired effect. They're just cutting it and pressing it and moving it on because it's so cheap. They don't care.
Exactly. And I know, a lot of people got like addicted to that oxy, and then, they started tightening controls on that. So now they got fraudulent oxy with this fentanyl in it. And like you said, man, you don't have to shoot up. You just take a pill. You don't know what you're getting. They're even putting the marijuana on my understunderstanding. So that's crazy, man. That's crazy. So, hey, you might say, hey, I'm not a hard drug user, but do you know where your stuff's coming from?
Well, before we end this interview, man, I want to talk about in your book, Black and Brown, what possible solutions did you come up with in this book, man? From, you have numerous experience, as someone who was out there in the streets, almost became a gang member yourself, to working in law enforcement. You've seen both sides. You've seen both sides of the coin is what I'm getting at, man. So to me, that's a big deal because there's a lot of law enforcement out there that only know one side of the coin. When you come from both sides of the coins and can see from both angles, I think that you can process things a little bit different and hopefully give solutions because you understand both sides of it. A lot of times law enforcement don't understand it and they just go one direction with things and trying to find solutions.
Yeah, same with gang members, ex-gang members. We only know, the lifestyle. We don't know we have enough sense now, you know what I mean, as having foresight and maturity, but we didn't live that life though, you were on both sides.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people ask me that question, hey, Gabe, what can we do about the gang problem? And I'm like, hey, there's no gang problem, there's gang problems. There's no drug problem, there's gang drug problems. So therefore it takes multiple solutions, so I would say probably first and foremost is we need a lot of better prenatal care. Even when a baby's in a womb, if a woman is drinking a fifth of whiskey every day, imagine what it's doing to that fetus. It's pickling that baby. It's going to have brain damage. The odds are very high. It's not going to come out. They used to talk about the crack babies. I remember back in my day. Well, a lot of them grew up, and we're dealing, I think, a lot with our mental health issues.
Yeah,
a lot of those individuals, they never had that brain development. I talked about, for males, it's about 30. It's about 20 for females. That's what science says, anyways. And I've looked at the research, and I can kind of buy that because I've actually seen that in my own observations in people. So the brain hasn't developed yet. So when the child is still a baby, even in the womb, sometimes we got to make sure that it's well nourished and being taken care of. You can get a driver's license, and most people take a course for that. But what about having a baby? We got women having baby, have men fathering babies, and have no training whatsoever in it. Yeah, maybe they were schooled by their parents, but we got a lot of people out there that were babies themselves. They were teens themselves when they were parents. They never really learned how to be a parent well. So I think parenting classes would be good. Now, how do we make them go to that? I don't know. Maybe like free Pampers or free formula or something, or discount or something like that. A lot of people say we're giving out too much free stuff. But some kind of incentive for attending those classes to be better parents. Our schools, I talk about the schools to prison pipeline. A lot of our kids are being pushed out of schools, and I think there's some improvements on that. but gangs thrive like, in alternative schools. Kids are dropping out. I know they have a lot of these, DARE programs and great programs against gangs and against drugs and stuff. It's too late. I'm talking to teachers and they're talking about first graders in kindergartens that are showing signs of gang activity. So you got to do it really as part of the curriculum. Yeah, we need to teach them, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Actually, I think there's only one R in that. That might be part of the problem. But teach them some life skills. How to balance a checking account. How to pay their bills.
Credit.
We're these children today are very materialistic, and money don't grow on trees. They need to know how to manage their money, how to manage their lives, and I think that's really where we need to do a much better job. Because on the tail end, it's a lot more money and a lot more time and a lot harder.
I think communication and trust needs to be repaired within communities, though, man. I'm talking about, within the school districts, within law enforcement, within everything, man, because there's so much distrust because there's so many other antics, man. There's people who say, man, you have 1,000 good cops, but you have one, man. And if everybody turns a blind eye to that one bad cop, you have 1,001 bad cops. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think there needs to be a lot more repair in that aspect, and to where people, accountability, man. I mean, if you have no trust, you have no working relationship with the community, because you've got to have it with the community leaders, the people that are in the community, and everything to combat that gang violence mindset. You know what I mean?
Oh, I agree with you. There has to be accountability for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're an accused offender or whether you're a cop. Whether you're a politician or a civilian. Everybody, a lot of people say, there's different rules, and it seems to be true. You hear about it on the news and maybe even see it in person. It seems to be different rules for different people. And, COVID has really, made our world crazy. And, we can't have different rules all over the place. We're getting different information from different sources, and it's very confusing. And yeah, I think you're right.
What I seen as a kid, man, this stands out to me. When I was like 14 or 13, getting involved in the mix, I seen older dudes getting out of prison, telling us war stories about being gang members, buying us alcohol, giving us drugs, people's uncles, people's dads. I think, now knowing what I know now, I think it's up to like those who were gang members or even still active gang members to have a little bit more responsibility to teach the young. Just because they're living in that life, whatever they may be doing, illegally, legally, or whatnot, not to promote that to our nephews, not to promote that to our kids, our cousins. Because I could sit there and play the tape out as a kid back in like 91, 90, 89, and having dudes that were grown men getting out of prison, having a lot of influence on that gang lifestyle with me. You know what I'm saying? So I think, I think as grown men, as adults, whether they're living that lifestyle or not, I think there has to be more responsibility to teach the youth a different way, even if you're living in a bad lifestyle.
Well, most definitely. And that's why I came on your guys' channel, because I know you guys do that. And there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of myths around it. But, the reality is, I've seen it. You guys have heard it. You're in there getting prison food, man. It's nasty. They say that you got the calorie intake, but it's nasty, man. You might even get neutral loaf if you're in the hole. The calories are there, man, but it's nasty.
The loaf is deadly, bro.
I think, hopefully, the message is being sent, hey, you want to go have, enchiladas, tacos, Italian food, whatever you like to eat. You ain't gonna be able to do that in the joint, man.
No, not at all.
You do that by following the rules, by staying out here. You want to go see a movie you want to see. Be with your girl, make love to somebody, that cares for you, those kind of things. You appreciate those things a lot more when you don't have them. And I tell you, man, I've listened to those guys, man, and they are up there complaining all the time in the joint, in jail, all the time about they ain't got this and ain't got that, and this sucks, and this food is cold, and it's
first
nasty.
Week they get out, they're back to the same old thing, though.
Well, yeah, they forget real easy, and I think a lot of that has to do with drugs. Drugs, because they have the trauma and they haven't dealt with that. They're not getting the help they
drugs,
should be
money,
getting.
and ego.
Yep,
Those are the
yep,
three.
yep. They mask it with all those things, try to make themselves feel good. But yeah, that's like you guys said, at your shows, a lot of times at the end, stay the F out of prison, stay the F out of jail, stay off hard drugs,
Hey, you want to
that
take
they
it
don't
over
go
for
nowhere.
today, Gabe? You want to do the lesson of the day? What's the lesson of the day, Gabe?
Yeah. Well, I'll repeat. Will repeat. Stay the F out of jail. Stay the F out of prison. Stay the F off hard drugs, man. That's your lesson for today.
No doubt.
Okay, we appreciate you, man. So this is author Gabe Morales, also has a YouTube channel, Gangs, Cops, and Politicians, man. He's a friend of the channel, man.
Big friend.
Always
big
pushing
friend,
a positive message on here, man. One of the very few ex-law enforcement officers that are friends of the show that are really about the change and about bridging the gap between ex-cons and those in the community. And that says a lot about this, man. Appreciate for your time. Is there anything else you want to say to the listeners before we let you go?
No, thank you guys.
As well. I have one last thing. Hey, Gabe,
Okay.
can you rattle off the list of your books as well as where to get them?
Oh man, it might be easier just to say, hey, just in any search engine, put in Gabe Morales, prison gang book, street gang book, The Life and Times of Vato Loco.
He has a
Also,
bunch, you guys, and they're all
my latest book, Ending Black and Brown Violence in America, and they will pop up because I have like over a dozen books now. But I appreciate you guys for letting me come on the show. I appreciate your show. I watch it as often as I can, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right, you guys have a good day. It's your boy Rojo. We'll see you on the live later on this evening, man. Everybody out there, stay out of jail.